Hey, it's the Profit Answer Man, Rocky Lalvani. If you're new to the podcast, check out my interview with Mike Michalowicz. It's episode number 2. If you want to hear about each chapter in the Profit First book, go back and listen to episodes 3 through 13. Episode 1 is the why and how. On the Profit Answer Man, we learn money mastery without all the complicated accounting mumbo-jumbo using a simple system. Your accountant is busy documenting your transactions and creating a rearview mirror of what happened. My guess is you don't even look at the reports they sent you. If you're like most business owners, you struggle with this, and it's not your fault. We aren't taught money in school, and accountants aren't taught how to be profitable. The Profit First system created by Mike Michalowicz works, and he certified me to help you implement the system in your business. Remember, the new equation is sales minus profit equals expenses. Let's face it, without cash flow, you can't pay your employees, buy needed materials, or pay your mortgage and support your family. I help you to do that and more, so you can focus on the parts of the business you love and receive the rewards for your labor and investment into your business. The stronger you are as a business owner, the more jobs you create, the better we are as a country. Small business owners are the backbone of America, and for that, you deserve to be well rewarded. Just remember, more revenue does not equal more profit. That's why we focus on the bottom line. Today, we're going to focus on profit first for the service industry, with a little focus on medical and home-based businesses. Listen in as Jennifer talks about her CPA training and how it didn't prepare her to help small business owners to be profitable. This is why you may struggle when talking to your CPA. It's not what they've been trained to do. Jennifer Hottle earned degrees from Ohio State University and Cleveland State University, as well as certifications as a Profit First coach. Along the way, she's built successful businesses in medicine, independent film production, video game development, and professional coaching. Most recently, she earned her certificate as a licensed home bakery. Today, Jennifer shares key lessons on entrepreneurship and finance as an adjunct professor at Baldwin-Wallace University, on her Crush the Journey podcast, and also as a keynote speaker. And she does one-on-one consultations with her clients. She's also served on the board for the National Association of Women Business Owners, Cleveland chapter, as the Director of Programming. Let's meet Jennifer. Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, Jennifer Hottle. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Can you share a little bit about your business and what you do?
Sure. So I own a consulting business called J2H Consulting. And what I do is I help support home-based, primarily home-based, service-based business owners. So a lot of times these are lifestyle types of businesses. And where I help support them is really understanding their numbers, obviously applying profit first to it, but really helping them get it so that it's a business that's serving them.
So when you say lifestyle business, are many of them not working full-time, or is it just...
No, they are.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I didn't start off in specifically lifestyle businesses. I came from a background of medicine. And so I was working with a lot of medical practices. So they weren't obviously working out of their homes, but they provide professional services. And it was really, truly over time where it was how I was developing my own businesses that I was starting to attract more lifestyle. And what I mean is really designing a business, and it can be part-time, it can be a parallel income, it can be also full-time, but designing a business that works around the lifestyle that you want, right? And it can be whether you've got a brick and mortar or not, but it was what I was doing kind of unconsciously, but really because I've got a family, I've got small children, I've got other things that I do, besides run my business, that I wanted really and truly to have a business that was incredibly flexible of my own time, that I could actually, if I needed to, take appointments or run my kids to, their pediatrician, or they've got football games, or I've got meetings with other organizations. I also teach. So it was just a way that I could design a business around what I wanted. And I was finding that I was attracting businesses like business owners like that, who, without realizing it, part of their struggle was that how do they get to enjoy their life and have their business really support that?
So I built my business on those premises, like the number of clients, the time, everything was calculated out so that I could say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. I find most people don't do that. They
don't.
They go and say, oh, I want to start a business. And then they end up working more than they were ever working. And then they wonder why they can't enjoy life. And so you've got to be intentional with that up front.
You do. And what's interesting is I didn't come from a background like that. I grew up in small business. My father developed or built a medical practice for over almost 40 years. And I was fortunate to be a part of that during about the last 15, 20 years of it. And growing up, all I saw was that my dad was working all the time. We saw him, Sundays were our day, but that was pretty much it. He did make sure he carved out time to come to, special events like competitions or graduations or things like that. But generally, he was always working. And I just thought that's how you were supposed to do it. And that was my perception of having a small business. That was what you were supposed to. You're supposed to hustle and grind, right? And when I first started, that was what I was supposed to. I thought it was supposed to be hard. I thought you were supposed to, work all hours, and you're supposed to, when your kids go to bed, that's when you work all night in your business, and that's what I thought it was supposed to be. And after a year or two of doing this, I'm like, man, this is just, yes, I was building it and bringing in revenue, but man, oh man, I was exhausted. I was starting to get real snippy with my kids because I just, I was constantly, my mind was everywhere. And so I had to make the conscious decision to, okay, I need to rein it in, and it doesn't. And after meeting other entrepreneurs in various industries and realizing this is what they were doing, I'm like, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could design it the way you wanted.
You can. You just have to be intentional and say, this is possible and I'm going to make it happen. And then it does. Mm-hmm. But again, like you said, you've got to be intentional and design it that way.
Yeah.
So how did you learn about Profit First?
So, it's an interesting story. So I mentioned that I was working for a medical practice, and it was, we were doing very well. It was a multi-specialty practice, and they had been very, very well established in the community. But slowly but surely, if anyone knows anything with medical, especially if you're a small practitioner, and you're taking insurance as your primary source of income, you have very little control over what rates that insurance companies will reimburse you. And what was happening was, over the last few years I was there, reimbursement rates were coming down, costs were going up, and we had a large healthcare system that was sort of encroaching on our community. And so, referrals weren't coming as they used to. And so we were really, really struggling and financially. And it was hard because this was my job. I was supposed to, I was strategy, I was finance, I was kind of wearing a lot of different hats, but it was so frustrating because everything that I knew about business, I had learned about business, wasn't working. And I didn't know what else to do. So because of that, I'm like, okay, there's got to be something else out there. And just in my own kind of haste and search, and I stumbled on Profit First as something other people were using. And I think Mike had just come out with the book. So I had bought it, I had read it. And I'll tell you, when I first read it, because I have an accounting background, it didn't make any sense to me. This went against just about everything I was ever taught. Yet everything I was ever taught wasn't working. So I'm like, you know what, it's worth a shot. Why not? So I started doing like the instant assessments and profit assessments and realizing, oh my gosh, now I understand why we were struggling. And it really just helped clarify, okay, now I know we're struggling. Now I get why we're struggling. And so because of that, I was able to take the Profit First program, apply it, and develop a plan so that we can basically get the business right on the right track. And ironically, it was because of that it highlighted the fact that one of the ways that they would be able to really thrive is not having me there. They couldn't afford me anymore. So I essentially strategized myself out of a job. And they ended up, they agreed they had to lay me off. But it was also, they realized that they still needed what I did. So they actually asked if they could contract with me. And that was how my business started. I started consulting from that. They were my first client. And then I worked with the Profit First team to get certified in it. And, kind of just went from there.
And I don't think people realize what's going on in the medical industry. So you think, I'm a doctor, oh, life is great. But as you said, when you have large systems encroach and they control the referrals, all of a sudden you don't get clients anymore. And if somebody else is paying the bill, which in this case, it's insurance, then you're stuck not only on what they pay, but when they pay. And insurance companies are notorious for taking their time to pay and also for denying claims. And so then you've got to spend hours going back and doing this. So I think, the take-home message is the world keeps changing. Your business and the way you do things has to continue to pivot with it. And don't just expect that it's going to be perfect forever.
Well, it's funny you say that too, because, I think across the board, of course, every business was affected by what's been happening in the last couple of years with the pandemic. But one of my clients I work with as a medical practice, a mental health practice. And what was interesting with them is that, prior to the pandemic, they had a very good, they had a good revenue cycle. They had a good billing team. So their coding, their revenue was coming in very well. Pandemic hit and they had to pivot to doing telehealth. What was interesting about that is that it wasn't a large part of their practice before. And thankfully, the insurance companies and the federal government were open to more telehealth reimbursement and practices. But it expanded it. But what was the result of it was they didn't realize this, is that part of the reason they were really good with their revenue is because when their patients had to come to them, and they had a very good front desk system with collecting the patient portion. They collected their copays. They collected any balances. So they had very little in AR. Well, unfortunately, with telehealth, that totally turned it on its ear. And they ended up with a challenge of AR. Having a large AR that they didn't know what to do with that. So we were working through that, but then it became, okay, this is not temporary. Telehealth is going to be a major part of their practice. So now I'm working with them on, okay, how can we revise your billing policies to adapt to this so that, okay, all right, we'll deal with what you have now. How do you not have this happen in the future? And so it's going back and, okay, now we have to review all their practices now, and how do we adapt it to what your business is going to be from this point forward?
So it's time for a new business to be created. The digital waiting room, right?
Yeah.
In other words,
funny you say that. Yeah, it's actually part of what we talked about.
Instead of just coming directly to the practitioner, you go to the front desk. They already should know your credit card number. It's just a matter of saying, hey, can I go ahead and swipe? You good with that? And then let me whisk you off to a new Zoom room with the person you need to meet, or whatever they're using platform.
Yeah. So it's funny too. One of the things that we talked about was the fact that there's a patient perception of what healthcare should be. And most people don't think of healthcare as a business. It's an entitlement. This is part of my health. And, if you're asking, you're always looked at kind of as an evil entity if you're asking them for money. Oh, you only care about the money. You don't care about taking care of me. And of course, it's not the case. And so part of the challenge too is now having to sort of re-educate people to understand, yes, we want to take care of you. We care about you, but we're a business. We can't provide those wonderful services to you if we can't keep our business going.
I spent years in healthcare, so I know what it was, and I've seen what it's become. Yeah. And I do understand that mentality. And what people don't realize is if you don't pay for healthcare, then you're expecting people to be slaves, because nobody's going to empty a bedpan without getting paid, no matter how much they love you. People won't even do it for their own family. So yes, healthcare, there's a cost to it. And unfortunately, it's very expensive. And part of the reason it's expensive, one of the things I've learned is if you look at a hospital, they have no idea what the actual cost of service is. So if you went to them and said, how much does it actually cost you to do that operation? They would have no idea.
It's especially when you get into more complex, because you can't always anticipate. The more complex a service, right, the more risk there is. So of course it's hard to anticipate everything that you could possibly need. So each service, each time you do this service, that cost could vary. You're right. So it's a difficult one to know what your margins are sometimes.
It is. They struggle just like every other business.
They do. Yeah, they do.
So you also have another business too.
I did. Yeah. Speaking of the pandemic, I've been doing consulting for a number of years. And when the pandemic hit, of course, as most parents had it happen, all your kids came home and they had to do remote learning. And it was all very rushed and nobody was prepared for it. And, everybody did the best they could. But, I had 3 small kids and trying to navigate, Zoom meetings and who does what and for 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. So it was, and then trying to run my business from home. My husband also has a home business. So, fortunately, we were both home. But at the same time, we're trying to, navigate so many different things that it was so stressful. I turned to baking, as most people did. And it was just a release for me. But then I ended up kind of getting obsessed with it, and not only just baking for a release, but then I became obsessed with techniques and how to, what the proper equipment is and how to get it perfect. And it ended up honestly turning into a business for me. And so earlier this year, I actually became licensed as a home bakery. So that's something completely new for me. I had never worked in product before. So all of it, just from profit first to cost and everything that goes with it, was just completely learning, most of it hands-on learning for me.
I want to take a step back because you said you came from an accounting background. And when you looked at profit first, you said this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
What was that all about? Like, where was that struggle there?
Well, because when I was in school, you're, in accounting, of course, at the time, this was in the mid to late 90s, the focus at the time was, okay, everybody went the route of a CPA. Everybody went to go work or intern for one of what was then the big 6 firms. We were all we were taught to look at large corporations. And in my training, in our education, we were focused on profit, but not necessarily as, it was like it's an event. It just happens once a year. You're analyzing the books to see if you're profitable. And the focus was more on, okay, let's make sure everything is documented properly, everything is posted properly. Can you interpret what this means? And profit wasn't really looked at as something you can necessarily have the intention up front to control. yes, you can increase your sales. Yes, you can reduce your cost to improve your profitability. But it was one of those like, okay, let's implement this. And then we're going to cross our fingers. And at the end of the year, let's see how things go. And that's really more of how I was taught. It was more about making sure things were posted properly. You're interpreting it properly. And it was very tax focused. So, and most of my classmates went that way. They all went the way of the big firms, which was fine, but that just wasn't for me. And small business, but we weren't really taught about how to work with a small business then. So when it came time many years later for me to figure out how to help, this small business, and I learned of Profit First and I read it and I'm like, well, this is contrary to everything. How do you can actually select how much profitability you can have up front, and you can actually take that up front, and you can actually, divide it up so that your company pays for your taxes, and you can know how much you want to take home. I mean, it was crazy to me. Yet when I implemented it, I'm like, well, this works. And it not only that, it was amazing the peace of mind that it brought. It's not that you don't do the gap stuff. Of course you do all the gap stuff. There's nothing contrary to that. It was really towards, honestly, the mentality, the mindset that you can take it up front and then your business runs on what's left over, not the other way around. And it took me a while to really kind of wrap my head around that.
And we still have trouble sometimes with accountants. They're like, you're doing what and why? And that makes no sense. And I go, yeah, I know. It's not how you were trained. I get it. This is all about human behavior and mindset. Yeah. This is not about accounting and doing that. It's a cash flow system that just works based on the way we business owners work.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any client success stories with Profit First?
I do. One of my most favorite ones was a practitioner I worked with. She had come from working in the large hospital systems and was making excellent money, but she was burning herself out. And she had made the conscious decision about a year before she left that she was going to open her own practice. But not only that, she was opening a concierge type practice, a membership practice, direct primary care. And it's completely different than what most people do when they go into medical practice. They deal with insurance companies. Well, she didn't want anything to do with it. She was going to be completely membership. She was going to control the amount of money so that she can get, and at the same time, her biggest thing, provide the kind of care she wanted to provide. She wanted a lot more control. Again, lifestyle. She knew the lifestyle she wanted. She knew that to do that, yeah, she took a hit in her income, but at the same time, she'd get a better quality of life. And so when she came to me, she had already been established, but she wanted to implement the Profit First. And so, thankfully she was already familiar with it. So we helped implement it. And it was difficult for her because she wasn't used to paying herself. She came from the same mentality that I grew up with, which was, okay, you hustle, you work in your business, and you kind of pay yourself when you can. And so that was something her and I worked with, is making sure, okay, you're paying yourself consistently, and we're going to make sure we're setting money aside, for the taxes. And the success part, was about 3 or 4 months later, as we were building up her accounts. Her accountant presents her with her tax bill that she wasn't expecting. She knew it was coming, but she wasn't expecting it. And it was for like 2 quarters worth. And so she got the bill, and for a second she panicked because she thought she'd have to pay for it out of her own pocket, until she looked at her balances and her bank accounts and realized that she had more than enough in her tax account to be able to pay that bill. And that's when she came to me. She's like, oh my gosh, I knew the system could work, but I didn't know how well it could work, how it was going to make her feel to know that. And so that was when it was like, okay, not that she wasn't committed to it before, but this was like tangible proof to her that, oh my gosh, yeah, we're going to keep going with this. Let's keep going. And so she could pay her tax bill. And the next year she actually was able to attend a family gathering where she had to fly international. And again, she was prepared to do it personally, but her profit distributions ended up being able to pay for that trip for her. And so it's just seeing tangibly, oh my gosh, this system not only works, but it's actually supporting, I can actually achieve now the lifestyle I really want. It's not theoretical anymore. So it was a great success for her to come back to me. I knew it was going to work, but for her to be able to tangibly see that was incredible.
So I'm confused because I know the economics of concierge care. I would have assumed she'd make more money.
Not in the beginning.
Not in the beginning, right? But
right. Well, so this was the challenge. So she knew she had already had her established pricing based on membership. She had membership pricing for age groups. For her, though, was that she was the only practitioner. And so she had no nurses at that time. We ended up using the profit first methodology to be able to actually set aside funding. So eventually she actually was able to hire on a part-time nurse, but she was the only practitioner. So she had to be very conscious about how many patients she could manageably, what her capacity could be to maintain the lifestyle she wanted, at the same time providing the right amount of care and quality of care. Because part of the direct primary care is that, patients aren't waiting in the waiting room. They get adequate time with their provider. They get access to them via email or phone calls. There's a lot more direct access and care that happens outside of the exam room. So she had to, make a very conscious decision to have her membership prices be adequate enough that she could have a good income, but also control the amount of patient load. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. I look at it and say, okay, well, if we're going to have concierge service, maybe $2,000 a year per client. I have 200 clients. I make $400,000, right? And that's the way I do numbers. And I'm like, if you're a family practice doc, after you pay for the nurse and a little bit of overhead, you're making the same amount of money seeing a fraction of people a day.
And that's where she was heading towards. And then eventually that is where it was going. Her thing, though, was her other thing was that she wanted to provide care for an underutilized Hispanic population. And so she had to be mindful, too, of where her membership pricing was going to be to be able to serve that particular population. So there were a number of factors, but, we made in working with her, we made some very strategic moves to be able to really build the kind of practice she wanted and have the lifestyle that she wanted as well.
And you just have to figure out the levers,
yep.
See how they go together and make it work.
Yep.
So in all the clients that you've worked with, any tips on how to be more profitable? Any ahas that have come out of what you've seen?
In a couple of ways. So one of the tips I would have is understanding what you want to have out of your business. And meaning, we just talked about, being very intentional with what kind of lifestyle you want, right? Because part of the profit first and the owner's compensation is supporting your lifestyle. And so, the profit is about, about rewarding yourself for being the owner. Owner's comp is about supporting your lifestyle. So what do you really need? And it's just coming down to writing, what are your numbers? And one of the tips I would have is, okay, maybe people don't always do this, but really sitting down, what do you need to support your lifestyle? And not just survive it. Like, yes, of course, you can, make sure and do cost cutting and things, but you're not just trying to get by. What do you want to, is what's important as part of that? Is it, want to make sure you take vacations? Do you want to be able, what are the things that are going to enjoy and enhance your life? And how can your business support that? So that's I think the biggest thing right there is, just literally coming down to the numbers, just itemizing it. One of the things that I worked with a client is we combined Profit First with the YNAB, the You Need a Budget system. And it's very effective with that, because it also helps you be very intentional with where your money really needs to be, again, to support what you want to be doing.
Are you still doing the separate accounts?
With YNAB?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So with my client that I used it with, where it became, what was interesting was that as we were solving her, implementing Profit First and kind of solving for the sort of the cash flow budgeting, what she ran into was that, yes, okay, now we've got the money set aside for operating expenses. What she was struggling with at that point, it was interesting, like you saw one problem and sort of it highlights the next problem that you didn't really know. And so in this case, yes, we have the money set aside, but she didn't quite understand, okay, how do we allocate these funding for all the different expenses that she has, because they weren't always as recurring at the same time. Some of it was annual, some of it was quarterly, some of it was monthly. And so we use the YNAB as part of that to say, okay, here's the amount that we're allocating to operating expenses. Now we're going to take this, okay, what percentage of that needs to be set aside for what? And so you still have all of it. It's just kind of like a sub system to help organize that part of it.
And that makes total sense. Because in my company, I'm doing my own bookkeeping, which I don't recommend for most people. It's just that I happen to know how to do it and I don't have a ton. I will put forward transactions into QuickBooks. So at the beginning of the month, I'm already putting in the entire month worth of bills so I can look and see, will I make it through this month or not? And I'll know because it's up front. I've got a pretty good idea and I can look at that and go, oh, we're not going to make it through the month. We need to either move money into that from reserves, or it also is the immediate signal. Hey, I think you're spending too much again.
Sure.
Right? And it tells you that.
And that's, I think that's really the heart of it, is you're trying to minimize any surprises anymore. You can really do very well in predicting, as you said. All right, we know ahead of time. It's not like, oh, crap, payroll's due in 4 days and we don't have the money. What are we going to do? Right? Which I've experienced. And that's not a pleasant feeling to have.
No, and that's why, but you know what payroll's going to be, or at least you have a pretty good idea of what payroll's going to be for probably the entire year, right? Within a couple of percentage points, you can say, hey, and this is when it's going to happen. And that's a lot of what we do. We do forward forecasting, and we'll look out for the year. And as we do the budgeting, we're like, okay, we pay every 2 weeks. What 2 months am I going to have that extra payroll? So I know that ahead of time. I know that now. I can tell you now for next year what that looks like. And for me, I do have, my spending is not standard throughout the year. And it's because I have taken about 25 to 30% of my spending and I pay it in lump sums because I get a significant discount. So I know that there's a certain time of year, and it's usually over the summer, where I'm going to get slammed for a quarter of my entire spending in that 2-month period, on top of, this is the season when you take a lot of trips to go to conventions. So literally I'm looking at, 40% of my spending probably coming up within a 3-month period. And so we just got to plan for it and know that and forecast it. And it's all doable. It's amazing what happens when you sit down, you look at the numbers, you forward plan, and then you reverse engineer your business around your life, which is what I did. And it works like a champ.
I'm a big believer in reverse engineering.
If people would like to learn more about your services and find you, where is the best place for them to do that?
It's my websites, I should say. So if you're looking for the consulting part of it, you can go to j2hconsulting.com. And I actually have some great free program in there for being able to really understand. You want to understand your numbers and give you a quick assessment. And it's free. You can learn about it from there. You can also schedule a chat with me through there, which is also free. And if you're interested in the bakery side and wanting to, get some holiday treats coming up, you can go to mamas3bakery.com.
And I'll make sure to put those into the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This was fun.
I encourage you to design your business around you. How much do you need to make? How much do you want to work? It's amazing what's possible when you think it through and change your business model to what works for you. I spent a lot of time coming up with my business model to make sure it worked for me, and I keep updating it based on how it's going and what I learn. And then you pivot. My goal is that you do the same and you be profitable. If you enjoyed listening to Jennifer, check out her work and her website. It's in the show notes. By the way, I built this business on an abundance mindset, which means my so-called competition is welcome to come on here and talk about their work, their platforms, their systems. Because at the end of the day, the goal was your success. And I know not all of you are going to connect with me, but I want you to get the best help you can get. Remember, you don't need more resources. You need to be more resourceful. We focus on the bottom line. If you want a done-for-you service, you can have me as your Chief Profitability Officer. Because you have your zone of genius and want to spend your time doing what you love. I only work with a handful of clients, so they get my full attention. I work with business owners who have or are growing to $500,000 to $5 million in revenue. You can use the scheduling link in the show notes to get on my calendar for a good fit conversation to see if I'm the right person to support you and how I can help you. If you want to learn about living the life of your dreams, check out my other podcast, Richer Soul. As we close out, let's repeat the mantra. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Have an abundant and profitable week.